23rd of September 2013, I went to an event over at the Lambeth Accord, and the event was called Disabled People Making History. This event was launched in order to celebrate UK Disability History Month in Lambeth and to develop a Lambeth Disability History Archive. I arrived fairly early at the event to ask if it was okay to shoot some photos, and we asked a few questions and we were happy with that. I met David Strong, the director from DSAL, which stands for Disability Advice Service Lambeth. Now, what is that charity about, I hear you ask? Well, you can get more information off their site, which is www.disabilitylambeth, which is all one word, .org.uk. Now, they were set up in 2001, having previously operated since 1984 as a project of a larger charity, Lambeth Accord, under the name In the Know. And that was the charity that they had operated under, I believe. Their organisation is controlled by disabled people through their management committee, which has a majority of disabled trustees, and they're growing, and their membership is growing. Their job is to provide a range of high quality information, advice and advocacy, direct payment support and user involvement services to disabled people in Lambeth. Since December 2009, they have also been providing information and general advice services to carers as part of the consortium delivering the Carers Hub Lambeth. Their newest service is the Lambeth Resolve, a consortium of local charities led by Age UK Lambeth, which provides information, advice and advocacy to older and disabled people. So, okay, what was the event about? The event called the Lambeth Disability History event. Well, basically, it was about illustrated talks on current disability history work. This will be involving like the Lambeth Accord, Lambeth Mencap and the Alliance for Inclusive Education, how they are working with Lambeth Archives on creating this disabled people's history. And the event also had a look at what is happening in Lambeth to celebrate UK Disabled History Month 2013 from November to December. Plus, you could get involved in creating a Lambeth Disability Oral History Project and get involved in helping creating the history archive on disabled people. And this was at the event. So if I take a look at the event a bit more closely, what was in store for me at the event over on Monday when I went over there. I think it must have been on the 23rd of September. But looking at that agenda, we got a welcome and introduction to the event by David Strong. And then David talked about UK Disability History Month and plans for a Disability History Archive. We then got presentations about the history of Lambeth Accord by someone called Adrian, and then we got a talk by someone called Boz Brownie from the Lambeth Mencap, who gave a delightful talk about the history of Lambeth Mencap and how they developed. Next, we got an introduction to a project called ALFI, which stands for Alliance of Inclusive Education, which is a campaign for all disabled learners to have the right to access and to be supported in mainstream education, and more on that later. We then got a little talk about Lambeth's archives resources, and after that we got shown some vox pops or what I think seemed like videos about how disabled people thought about their identity and condition. And last up was the workshop on what we thought would be useful in adding to Lambeth's Disabled People's History Archive in the future. And then, I said last up, but I think the last thing, we've got some refreshments, which was, as usual, very tasty. Now, I must warn you, this audiobook is a little long, because I've got to admit, the event had so much information. It was jam-packed with lots of information about the history of the Accord and the history of disabled people, which is very important because they can get excluded from history. So let's begin. Let's get on with the first part of this event, where Mark Strong gave us an introduction. Now, it seems during Lambeth celebration of the Disability History Month, there has actually been 3 events done so far. I mean, I don't know what they really are, but it just shows that they have been rather busy. And although the other events have been happening, David hopes that the celebrations happen more than once a year. Now, David mentioned that there are missing bits of the jigsaw about people's lives in Lambeth, be it physical health, mental health, and disability. And it would be great to fill in the gaps to raise awareness of Lambeth at large in the community. David talked about how the Lambeth Archive Department has some things, but they still have huge gaps on disabled people, especially in the history. There seems that there's a lot of work to do, and this event is a good place to start. Now, the event will show some work that is going on about the History Archive project. Some of that work is well developed, however, other information is provided from the local disability organisations Accord. Someone at the event called Trisha had put together a snapshot of information, but David felt that this event would be great to get ideas from others about what is needed to focus on disability in history. David mentioned that next year Lambeth is the Lambeth Accord, I think it's around 30 years old, and has mirrored a lot of history. And so far, 14 charities has used the Lambeth Hub. So, looking at that last statement I made about the 14 charities and how old Lambeth Accord was, we actually got a nice presentation, although it was going along quite quickly, but I caught a fair bit of information into the history of Lambeth Accord, which is presented by a fellow called Adrian. Now, Adrian talked about the following informational sections about Lambeth Accord's history. He talked about how a group was formed in 1981 to look into promoting the social and economic integration of disabled people into the community. He talked about how Lambeth Accord became a charity and company in 1983. How in 1984 to 1985, Lambeth Accord had sections added to the building and parts of the building was converted. We were shown some pictures of the building throughout the later 1980s, and information about the newsletters called, I think it was called Mole, that were being published and released, and some information about the staff who used to work at the building across the years. Then he talked about how Lambeth Accord survived the financial crisis throughout 1999 to 2000. Then we had a talk about what charities are actually present in Lambeth Accord, in the Lambeth Accord building today. Now, after that presentation about the history of Lambeth Accord, we got to hear from Lambeth Mencap's director, Boz Browry. Now, Lambeth Mencap is, I believe, 60 years old, so Boz gave us info on what Mencap does. Now, if we take a look at Lambeth Mencap site, and remember there is also a national Mencap site as well, and you can have a look at the Lambeth Mencap site, which is www.lambethmencap.org.uk. Now, looking into what Mencap actually does, Mencap is the leading UK charity for people with a learning disability and their families. Everything they do is about valuing and supporting people with a learning disability and their families and carers. Mencap works to gain support, education, housing, jobs, and recreational opportunities for people with learning disabilities. Now, Lambeth Mencap is working closely with other carer services as part of the Carers Hub Lambeth, which supports carers of all ages in a variety of ways. The other members of Carers Hub Lambeth are Crossroad Care, which is South Thames, DASL, which is Disability Advice Service Lambeth, I've mentioned them before, and Lambeth Age UK. Now, the Carers Hub provides the following services and opportunities for the carer or for the disabled person within the family. I'll go through a few here just to give you an idea what services they provide. One of them is they have an inquiry line which you can ring from Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, for accurate and up-to-date information, and have help to be connected to the right services that are available for yourself. Have in-depth advice and support on matters such as benefits and housing. They have a mentoring service offering one-to-one support on any of the challenges that you may face as a carer. They have a newsletter and a website highlighting special interests, information and local news events. An opportunity to increase local contacts and share useful information at their carers forums, mini forums, carers groups and coffee mornings. They give you opportunity to share ideas and experiences online through their website forum. They also provide back care treatments provided by the British School of Osteopathy. Okay, I forgot to mention here that I actually work at the London School of Osteopathy, so I hope I'm not providing any rivalry here. And they have a specialist service for carers of people with mental health problems. Now, going back to Boz's talk, he gave us some more info of first disability meeting done in 1953, and the group went through many changes. But the first meeting, I believe, was Herne Hill, Backward Children. Now, if I just stop there, a word of warning. Back in the 1950s to perhaps the early 1990s, there is a use of horrid terminology to describe the disabled, even in the terms of the organisations that supported them, as I mentioned the name, the Herne Hill Backward Children. So I do not mean to offend anyone, and this is something that's quite apparent when you're actually looking through the archives of disabled people. There'll be a lot of crude terminology, which was actually through legislation. Boz showed us a book tracing the use of this terminology, and such terminology used in the 1920s described the disabled as idiots or feeble-minded, and these terms were actually, as I said, legislation. You mentioned about the 1970 Acts also described through these terms, although they gradually moved away from such terminology. Boz talked about how the Royal Mencap is the national organisation which was formed in 1950, and he then talked about a person called, I think, Judy Fred, who wrote a letter to the Nursing Times about her family that had lacked support, and this letter actually led to the formation of Mencap. The little support was, I believe, was in 1953, and families had to get together to raise the support. There just wasn't that much support around in those times. The Society for Mental Health Children was the original title for Mencap, I believe, and around 1980, the national body then changed its name from children to adults, and there was a reason behind that. I won't go into it as present in case I sort of give out the wrong information. In the 1990s, the term mentally handicapped was changed. Thus, the organisations changed their name to Mencap. However, charities like Mencap heavily rely on fundraising linked to their name. Bosden showed us the Lambeth yearbook, and shown on one slide, I think it's from 1973, and on another slide how they moved from Herne Hill. Bosden highlighted on one of the other slides an image of two children. I think one of them was called Little Stephen, and it was used as the picture for the Royal Society, which was actually shown off the charity tins. Although it was noted that Lambeth Mencap never used that image. Now, I believe Lambeth Mencap, had done many campaigns, especially against what was against children with learning disabilities who were regarded as not educatable. And these campaigns were also done for respite and day services, although they did not actually exist in the 1950s. Boz also then talked about how the picture of the yearbook was used to develop a logo, which was used around about 20 years, which has been used for around about 20 years or so. And he then mentioned that the organisation got its first worker in the 1980s. The charity became more successful with a turnover from, I believe, 100,000 to 2 million, and the decision of the committee helped keep the Lambeth Mencap running, while other Mencaps from different boroughs did not have such a strong committee, and thus those Mencaps sort of fell through. They sort of disappeared. Now, even though Lambeth Mencap started off as a parent organisation, writing letters and trying to gain support, actually some of them still are, and they have a self-advocacy, although it might have fed off from the self-advocacy movement. And lastly, but most interestingly, Boz talked about a person called Joy Deacon, who lived in an institution for 40 to about 50 years, mainly because he could not communicate. Now, I believe Joey, what was talked about, at eventually he wrote a book about his life, and so I didn't know what the book was called. I believe the key thing he said was about when we decide to listen carefully to what those who are in care were talking, we're trying to communicate, we're talking about, and things began to change. This led to a movement on how to get those with disabilities to get access to more communication in education. I believe that was the case. And next we got an introduction to a project called ALFIE, which stands for the Alliance for Inclusive Education, which fed off nicely about who I talked about being Joey Deacon, who Boz talked about. And you can get more information about this project called Alfie off their site, which is www.alfie, which is spelled ALLFIE.org.uk. So I'll say that again, www.alfie, or maybe orfie.org.uk. Now, what is Alfie? It seems that they are a national network led by disabled people and supported by allies that include parents, educators and head teachers. And the alliance has campaigned successfully over the last 20 years to remove the legal conditions which have served to limit the rights of children with special educational needs to secure a supported mainstream placement. Now, if you want to get an idea of what they're all about, I'll go through their 7 principles listed off their site for inclusive education. And the first principle is diversity, which enriches and strengthens all communities. The next principle is that all learners' different learning styles and achievements are equally valued, respected and celebrated by society. The next one is all learners need to be enabled to fulfill their potential by taking into account individual requirements and needs. Then we have support to be guaranteed and fully resourced across the whole learning experience. Next, we have all learners need friendship and support from people of their own age, and all children and young people to be educated together as equals in their local communities. One of the last principles is inclusive education is incompatible with segregated provision both within and outside mainstream education, and their motto is education, not segregation. Now, at the event we were shown a bit more on Alfie about pictures of their posters, how they produced a range of teaching resources, and we got to have a look at their website. And we also got shown video interviews of their site. I think one video was about a disabled person speaking about employment problems. Right, next up, we had Trisha Riley speaking about Vox Pops. Although I'm not too sure what Vox Pops mean. Maybe someone can get back to me on this. There seem to be videos or some sort. One Vox Pop was on how cancer affected a lady on the film, lost her job, and how it devastated her family, I believe, and what facilities she used in order to try and get her life back in order and get her health on straight and narrow. I'm not sure how to put that in some sense. Now, she was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and she talked about how she's trying hard to tackle her illness. The video showed how even healthy people can become frail or disabled. And this led on to the question, what constitutes a disability? We then got to hear from Zoe from the Lambeth Archive, who appeared and gave us a little talk about what the archive department was planning. And then lastly, we got involved in the events workshop. And they wanted to find out what stories we would want to hear from disabled people's history as they're making an archive. And what they want is to achieve no more holes in the archive. Now, the questions were at that workshop. What do you know about disabled people's lives in Lambeth in the past or today? And I was rumbled, since I'm not really from Lambeth, so I had to let someone else answer that question. The next question was, what would you like to find out about disabled people's lives in Lambeth in the past or today? and I answered that one. I think that was, that's quite an interesting question actually. The third question was, how do you think the Lambeth Disabled People's Oral History Project could work? And I think maybe those are the Vox Pops. And then lastly, the last question would be, what would you want a Lambeth Disability History Archive to be like? Well, after the workshops and the roundup of the event, we got some lovely refreshments. But this time I was not so greedy, and I mingled with those who came to the event. And I then spoke to Margaret Farrell, the direct payments manager, and she talked a bit about the store that they had set up and it was on show. So I went through some booklets and leaflets that was at that store. Well, what did I think about the event? I really enjoyed learning about disabled organisations and the history of how they got started and the history of Lambeth Accord. I learned quite a lot looking through how disabled people faced difficulties, hardship, prejudice and problems throughout history, and even today they still face this. The event was well worth the effort to get to from my borough, which is over in Lewisham. Maybe when I get more time, I hope to find out more by attending events on disabilities. And I know this has been a long audio blog,